At my stepdaughter's wedding, I was seated at the organizer's table. I stood up, indignant, and an hour later they were begging me to return. "Excuse me, but I think there's a mistake with the seating." The young hostess looked at me with a practiced smile while holding the guest list. I had just finished supervising the final details of the floral decorations, and was finally about to sit down to enjoy the event I had organized over the last 6 months. "No, Mrs. Irene, it's correct. Table 14, next to the organizing team." My heart sank. Table 14 at the back of the room, next to the service doors. I instinctively looked up at the main table, where I could clearly see Andres, my husband, smiling while chatting with his ex-wife Maria, Carla's mother. Next to her was Carla's grandmother, who in 5 years had never called me by my name, only Andres's new woman. Do you know what it feels like to be standing in the middle of 300 elegantly dressed guests and realize that you're invisible? That everything you've done means absolutely nothing? I looked again at the table they had assigned me. There was my assistant, Lucia, 2 more coordinators from my team, and some teenagers who seemed to be distant cousins that nobody knew where to place. The leftovers table. I took a deep breath, swallowing my humiliation, and headed towards the main table where Andres, 50 years old, was drinking champagne as if nothing was wrong. To understand how I got to this moment, I have to go back 5 years. I met Andres at a wedding I was organizing. He was a recently divorced businessman. I was a 37-year-old event planner building her reputation in the industry. It was love at first sight, and 6 months later we were married in an intimate ceremony. What I didn't know then was that I was entering an emotional minefield. Carla, his daughter, was 20 years old at the time and made it clear from the beginning that she didn't need a stepmother. Dona Carmen, Andres's mother, welcomed me into her home with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Maria always makes the pozole the way Andres likes it," she told me once after I had spent 3 hours cooking for a family gathering. "Maria knits all of Carla's sweaters by hand," she commented on another occasion when I showed her the birthday present I had bought for my stepdaughter. "Maria is family, you understand," she whispered when I offered to help with the Christmas preparations. Still I tried. God knows I tried. I invited Carla to lunches that she canceled at the last minute. I sent her messages on important dates that were answered with a terse thanks. When she graduated from university, I gave her a trip that she ultimately took with her friends because she didn't feel comfortable traveling with me. Andres always had excuses. Give her time, she's busy, it's not personal. 8 months ago, Carla announced her engagement to Rodrigo, a lawyer she met at work. Andres was thrilled, but one night he came home dejected. "What's wrong, love?" I asked as I prepared dinner. "Carla is considering postponing the wedding," he sighed. "They don't have enough budget for the kind of celebration she wants." I thought for a moment. Maybe, just maybe, this was the opportunity one had been waiting for. A gesture that would finally break down those walls. "I could organize it," I offered, "at no cost as my wedding gift." Andres looked at me with bright eyes. "Would you do that?" That's too much, Irene. "I'd do it gladly. It's my profession. I have the contacts. I could get special discounts and absorb some of the costs." What I didn't tell Andres was that I was willing to pay a considerable portion out of my own pocket. As the owner of one of the most prestigious event planning agencies in the city, I knew exactly how to transform an ordinary wedding into something extraordinary. For the next 6 months, I immersed myself in the preparations as if it were the most important project of my career. I secured the Hacienda Las Jacarandas in Cuernavaca, a venue normally booked years in advance. I convinced Chef Ernesto Ramirez, who usually only works for celebrities, to design a gourmet menu. I imported exotic flowers, hired the most sought-after string quartet for the ceremony, and booked the musical group that was on an international tour for the reception. Every week I showed Carla the options, seeking her approval. She barely showed enthusiasm, limiting herself to shrugs or saying, "Whatever you think," which was her standard response, without even bothering to look at the catalogs or samples I meticulously prepared. "She's just overwhelmed with work," Andres explained when I came home frustrated. Deep down, she's very grateful. And I, naive me, believed him. I spent more than I should have on elements that I knew would make the wedding memorable for years. Centerpieces made with specially grown orchids, custom lighting that would subtly change throughout the night to create different ambiances, a cocktail station with an internationally awarded mixologist, and a dessert table designed by a French pastry chef. The week before the wedding, I worked 16-hour days coordinating every detail, solving last-minute crises, ensuring everything was impeccable. The night before, while reviewing the guest list and table assignments one last time, I noticed that my name didn't appear next to Andres's at the main table. It must be a mistake, I thought. I didn't give it much importance. The list they had given me was probably not updated. And so we arrive at the moment I find myself now, walking towards my husband in a room full of people, with the growing certainty that it was no mistake, that all this time, despite my efforts, I was never considered family. Andres, I said when I finally reached his side, keeping my voice low so as not to attract attention. Why am I sitting at table 14 with my work team? My husband placed his champagne glass on the table, and I could see his expression subtly change. His eyes avoided mine, a gesture I had learned to recognize when he was uncomfortable. Ah, Irene, there you are. The wedding is turning out beautifully. Everyone is commenting on how elegant it all is. Andres, I insisted. I'm asking you about the seating arrangement. He ran a hand through his graying hair, a nervous tic that appeared when he felt cornered. Finally, he looked at me, but not completely in the eyes. Look, let's not make a drama out of this. Carla and her grandmother thought it was best that only immediate family be at the main table. Immediate family, I repeated, feeling as if I had been slapped. I'm your wife. Irene, please understand. These are family traditions. Maria is Carla's mother. It's normal for her to be at the main table. And what am I? And then he said it with a naturalness that chilled my blood. You know you're not really part of it, Irene. You're here in a professional capacity. You also know how Carla is. She didn't want to make her uncomfortable on her special day. I felt a lump in my throat so thick I could barely breathe. My hands started to shake, and I had to interlace my fingers to hide it. Did you defend my place at that table? Was all I could ask. Andres looked away again, and that was all the answer I needed. At that moment, Donna Carmen approached with her perpetual expression of poorly disguised contempt. Irene dear, everything is turning out beautifully, although Maria would have preferred gardenias instead of orchids. She always said orchids are ostentatious, but well, to each their own. I looked at this 75-year-old woman who for 5 years had found subtle ways to make me feel inferior, then at my husband, who was contemplating his plate with sudden interest, and finally at the bride, Carla, in her impeccable dress that I had gotten through a designer friend, laughing with her bridesmaids, completely oblivious or indifferent to my humiliation. Something broke inside me at that moment. It wasn't a dramatic outburst but a sudden cold clarity, like when glass cracks silently before shattering completely. Without another word, I turned and walked with my back straight towards one of the private anterooms. With each step I remembered every slight, every hurtful comment, every excuse from Andres. This is what my dignity had been reduced to. Why had I allowed so much? Once alone, I took my cell phone and called Lucia, my assistant and right-hand woman for 8 years. Lucia, I need you to come to the anteroom right now. Bring Carlos and Sofia with you. My voice sounded strangely calm even to me. While I waited, I mentally organized everything I had personally contributed to this wedding, the exclusive elements that I had paid for out of my own pocket, clearly separating them from what was covered by the basic package that I had officially charged Rodrigo's family, who had insisted on contributing financially. When my trusted team entered, all three looked at me with concern. They must have noticed something in my expression because none of them asked the obvious question of what was happening. I need us to remove some elements from the event, I said firmly. Specifically, everything that was my personal contribution. I explained with surgical precision the imported orchid centerpieces, the custom lighting, the premium cocktail station, the additional musicians I had hired to complement the main band, the exclusive decorative elements I had purchased on my travels. All of that had to be removed discreetly, without causing disruption but efficiently. Are you sure, Irene? Asked Carlos, our technical coordinator. This is going to completely change the atmosphere of the event. Completely sure, I replied. We'll only take what's mine, what I paid for personally. The officially contracted service will continue without changes. As I gave instructions, I remembered last Christmas when I spent 3 days cooking for Andres's family only to hear Carla comment that, Mom's dinner always has that special touch. I remembered how Andres simply poured himself more wine instead of defending me. Lucia, also contact the mixologist and the pastry chef. Tell them to leave after this round of service. Their contracts are directly with me, not with the event. My team nodded, professional as always. Despite the unusual situation, they trusted my judgment. All three had witnessed my attempts to please this family for years and knew the full story. Start with the least visible elements and move towards the most prominent ones, I instructed Carlos. Make sure everything is removed carefully. I don't want any damage. These are valuable items that we'll use in future events. At exactly 9:47 p.m., 20 minutes after my conversation with Andres, the execution of my plan began. First, the additional ornamental lights on the columns and ceiling subtly went out, leaving only the basic lighting of the venue. Some guests looked up, confused by the sudden change in atmosphere, but most continued their conversations. Then, during a change of musical set, 4 of my employees efficiently removed the orchid centerpieces, leaving in their place the small secondary arrangements of local flowers that had served as a complement. I strategically positioned myself in a corner from where I could observe the entire process. At 10:15 p.m., as the waiters served the main course, the special cocktail station disappeared, leaving only the standard bar with the basic drinks included in the original package. The French mixologist, Jean-Paul, discreetly said goodbye to some guests who had praised his creations, explaining that he had another commitment. At 10:30 p.m., the murmurs were already evident. Guests leaned towards each other, subtly pointing to the now empty spaces where luxurious details had once been. The general lighting, now basic and flat, gave the room a completely different look than it had an hour ago. From my position, I could see the exact moment when Carla realized that something was happening. Her face lost its color as she looked around, noticing for the first time the absence of all those elements she had taken for granted. I saw her lean towards her mother, whispering urgently. Maria scanned the room until her eyes met mine. For a second, there was something like understanding in her expression. At 10:40 p.m., when the string quartet that had entertained during dinner said goodbye, leaving only the DJ hired for the end of the night, the panic at the main table was evident. Dona Carmen gestured emphatically. Andres kept running his hand through his hair, and Carla had teary eyes, alternating between indignation and confusion. I saw Rodrigo, the groom, get up from the table to talk to his father, who had paid for part of the event. The man seemed bewildered, gesturing towards the now empty corners where the impressive floral structures that complemented the main decoration had once stood. At 10:50 p.m., the premium service waiters, hired specifically by me to elevate the experience, were replaced by the hacienda's standard staff. The elegant synchronization of service gave way to more basic and slower attention. Just as the kitchen assistants were removing the special dessert table, leaving only the wedding cake and some basic sweets, Andres finally located me. His face was a mixture of panic and disbelief as he made his way between the tables towards where I was, now picking up my bag, ready to leave. What the hell is going on, Irene? Andres grabbed my arm as I tried to head for the exit. His voice was a mix of panic and contained fury. I freed myself with a gentle but firm movement and looked him straight in the eyes, something he hadn't been able to do with me an hour earlier. I'm just removing my personal contribution to this event, Andres. As you said, I'm here in a professional capacity, not as family. His face went from red to pale in a matter of seconds. Behind him, I could see Carla approaching with an altered expression, followed by her mother and grandmother. You can't do this. It's my daughter's wedding, hissed Andres, lowering his voice so as not to create a bigger scene. I'm not doing anything inappropriate, I replied with a calmness I didn't even know I possessed. The basic contracted service is still in place. The food will be served, the music will continue, the event will run its course. I've only removed the additional elements that I contributed as a personal gift. You ruined everything. Carla had reached us with reddened eyes and a trembling voice. How could you do this to me on my special day? I looked at her, and for the first time in 5 years, I didn't feel that desperate need to gain her approval. Instead, I saw a young woman who had never valued my efforts, who had never given me a genuine chance. Your wedding is still intact, Carla. All the services you paid for are functioning perfectly. I simply took my gifts since I'm not really part of it. I briefly looked at Andres, whose face contracted upon hearing his own words. I wish you a happy life together. I turned on my heels and continued walking towards the exit. The guests watched discreetly as Andres followed me, now pleading. Irene, please, can we fix this? Don't leave like this. I didn't answer. Outside, the valet had already brought my car. As I was about to get in, I felt Andres's hand on my shoulder. I'll compensate you for everything, he said desperately. Tell me how much everything you've removed cost, and I'll pay you right now. I turned to him and smiled slightly. It's not about the money, Andres. It never was. I sat behind the wheel. And for your information, what I removed tonight is worth approximately 650,000 pesos. But what you lost, that's priceless. I closed the door, started the engine, and drove away, watching in the rearview mirror as my husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, stood paralyzed at the entrance to the hacienda, with the phone ringing insistently in my bag. Tears began to fall when I was about 10 minutes down the road. They weren't tears of sadness but of liberation. 5 years of trying to belong, 5 years of excusing slights, 5 years of making myself small to fit into a space where I was never wanted. That night I slept in a hotel. The next morning, I blocked Andres's number, Carla's, Dona Carmen's, and anyone else connected to them. I called my lawyer and asked him to begin divorce proceedings immediately. I took a week off and then returned to my office, where my team greeted me with silent, professional support. In the following weeks, thanks to several friends who had attended the wedding, I learned what had happened after my departure. The celebration had continued, but in a tense and visibly degraded atmosphere. The contrast between the beginning of the party and its subsequent development was so stark that it was impossible to ignore. Elena, a designer friend who had attended as a guest of the groom's parents, told me over coffee that the comments among the guests were relentless. Everyone was asking what had happened, she said as she stirred her cappuccino. First discreetly, then openly when people found out how they had treated you. The indignation was general. According to her, the full version of what happened quickly leaked among the attendees. One of the musicians who left had explained to some curious guests that he was only following instructions after an unfortunate incident with the family. At one point, I saw Carla crying in the bathroom, Elena continued. Not out of sadness but out of anger. She said you had ruined her wedding over a simple seat. But you know what, Irene? Nobody agreed with her. I even heard Rodrigo's mother telling another lady that she had never seen such a display of ingratitude. Roberto, a photographer and old friend, showed me some pictures he had taken before and after my departure. The contrast was evident, from a magical and sophisticated atmosphere to one that was correct but ordinary. He told me that Andres had tried to explain the situation to Rodrigo's parents, who were visibly confused by the sudden change in the atmosphere of the event. Your ex-mother-in-law was trying to convince people that everything was planned that way, Roberto told me, laughing. That after the formal dinner, they wanted a more relaxed and youthful party. Nobody believed her, of course. The most satisfying thing, according to various accounts, was that I didn't have to explain anything to anyone. My actions had spoken for themselves. Andres's family was exposed, not by what I would have said, but by what they had done. During that first month, Andres tried to contact me incessantly, first through my lawyer, then through mutual friends, and even showed up at my office twice. My assistant, Lucia, dispatched him with icy professionalism. He says it was a misunderstanding, she informed me after his second visit. That Carla is sorry, and that her mother never wanted you to feel excluded. Too late, I simply replied, and continued with my work. The divorce was finalized 4 months later on terms completely favorable to me. Andres didn't dispute any of my requests, probably hoping that would soften my stance. It didn't. 6 months after the wedding, I received a message from Carla. It was the first direct communication since that night. Irene, I know you probably don't want anything to do with me, and I understand. I just wanted to tell you that I was wrong. I didn't value what you did for me. And what's worse, I allowed my grandmother and my mother to treat you badly for years. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I learned an important lesson thanks to you. Rodrigo and I are in couples therapy, trying to build a relationship based on mutual respect. I wish you the best. I didn't reply, not out of resentment, but because there was nothing left to say. That chapter of my life was closed. A year later, my event planning agency has grown significantly. I hired a personal therapist who has helped me process everything I've experienced, and I've reconnected with friends I had neglected during my marriage. I implemented a strict policy for my business. We only work with clients who value and respect us, no matter how much money they offer. 2 weeks ago, I ran into Donna Carmen at the supermarket. She looked at me as if she had seen a ghost. I simply smiled, slightly bowed my head in a polite gesture, and went on my way. I felt absolutely nothing, no resentment, no pain, not even discomfort. Her power over my emotions had completely disappeared. Do you know what the real revelation was in all of this? I discovered that self-respect is non-negotiable, that no relationship, no matter how it seems, is worth diminishing yourself or accepting being belittled. That sometimes the most dignified act is not to endure more, but to withdraw with your head held high. And above all, I learned that when you properly value what you offer, be it your time, your effort, or your heart, others have no choice but to value it as well or be without it. Sometimes you need to withdraw so they understand how much you're worth. And when you do, you discover that you are worth much more than you thought.